Hi there, I'm Jake. You know, I spend a whole lot of time talking about Magic the Gathering because, to me, it's definitely the game that I engage with most. But the reality is, there's a whole lot of games out there, and frankly, there's a lot of games out there that I play. You know, there's bits and pieces of every single one of these games in front of me that I absolutely love. And it just happens to be that Magic is the game that speaks to me most. But it got me thinking, how do you get into a game? How do you find out whether a game is right for you? You see, recently my LGS has started selling One Piece cards, and this is a game that, I'm going to be honest, I don't really understand. I decided I would dip my toe into it. I bought a starter deck, I got some singles, and I'm well on my way towards building a budget deck that I think works for me. But I do have a process for how I get into games, and I wanted to share my ideas on how to engage with a new game or a new game system. And whether that's a trading card game or a collectible card game or a tabletop miniatures game, I think we can follow similar steps. So pull up a chair and have a seat at the table. And whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake. Let's talk games. So let's explore how to get into a new game. Now, I'm going to be using Magic the Gathering for most of my examples and probably dipping into One Piece for some of my recent experiences, but the reality is this process works for nearly any trading card game or miniatures game, and I'd encourage you to apply it to whatever thing you are currently exploring. And if you have other ideas, I would love to hear them, so please share them down below and let me know what your approach is, because just like there's no perfect game for everybody, I don't think there's any perfect way of getting into new games that works for everybody. But my process follows three main principles, and it's right there in the name of the game. These are trading card games. And the three main pillars that I use to get into a game is trading, cards, and games. And we're going to approach each of those individually. I will note that there is no particular order or hierarchy or process that we have to use to move from one to the other. All three work in concert, and the goal is to develop all three at the same time, gradually building upon each other to create that comprehensive experience through the game. But let's flesh out a little bit of what each of those means. The first item, trading. I view that as the interaction between players. And this also translates to tabletop or collector or collectible. Whichever acronym you use to describe your gaming experience, the first word usually represents the community. Sharing experiences, coming together, and just talking about the game. And it doesn't necessarily need to be workshopping new metas or finding specialized decks to really be competitive. It could be discussing color schemes, or cool new discoveries, or finding interactions that are unique and weird and possibly bad. It's that community built around the lore, the community that shows up every Thursday night at the local game store to just crack packs and celebrate each other's big hits that they get. And that's our first point. Our second point is going to be the cards, or the miniatures. The product itself. It's that interaction with the tactile, tangible parts of the game. That could be the design space, or the style of the cards, or the quality of the miniatures, but just something that drives us further. I think the product is important. At the end of the day, the product is what you're going to be collecting, building up large shelves of. And if you don't enjoy looking at it, if you don't like interacting with it, I think it'll be really difficult to really get into it. And that brings us to our third point, the game aspect. Now, whether it's a trading card game or a tabletop miniatures game or a collectible card game, the one thing they all have in common is the game. There's some set of rules, some aspect of that game that we need to be invested in. And what's interesting is I think there's parts of these games that appeal to different people. There are those of us who like to play extremely competitively. People who like to chase the meta, build decks, build armies, build characters that are fully optimized, to really push the limits of the rules in which we play. But I think other people play more casually, or don't play at all. Their game is a treasure hunt. They are seeking to collect everything, or build an army that fits their particular lore, regardless of what the rules say. Building a character that really suits them personally. Building decks that do weird things and express who they are on the tabletop. But I think foundationally, we have to find a game that allows us to meet those 3 points: community, product, and gameplay. And now I'd like to dig into each one of those a little bit deeper and talk about the steps that I use to kind of gut check the game, find out whether it really is the right fit for me. Now, I said at the outset that there is no strict ordering or hierarchy between these 3 categories of community, product, and gameplay. But the reality is, it can be very difficult to buy the right product and find the right community if we know nothing about the gameplay. So I'm going to approach these topics in reverse order, with the understanding that ideally you are developing all 3 of these in tandem with each other. And so as you learn more about the gameplay and start to buy products that work with that, you can start seeking community that plays in the ways that you are interested. But let's start with that gameplay. How do we learn the rules and the styles and the options that we have for a game that we know nothing about? And I'm going to use my recent experience with One Piece as an example. So when I take a new game that I know nothing about, my first step is always reading the rules. And usually this comes down to looking up a shorthand PDF that someone made on Reddit that is a learn the rules of X game in under 5 minutes. It sometimes has gaps and sometimes doesn't cover every aspect of the game, but it's a good start for kind of generally understanding the structure. For One Piece, it says something like there are dawn cards that you use to pay the cost of creatures or characters, and you have this leader card with a red back on it that has a certain amount of life, and once that reaches 0, you lose the game. So we know kind of the general structure of the cards in our deck and the cards in our hand, and then we skip over all of the aspects of how to build a deck, how many cards of each type to include in a deck. We don't need to know any of that yet. We just want to be able to follow along with the process of gameplay. So we start with the leader, we build up resources that we can summon characters, and then we can use event cards out of our hands, and we're trying to attack our opponent's leader and knocking off some of their characters. Done. Boom. All right. I have a good handle on the gameplay. What's next? Well, for One Piece, what I did was then I went to YouTube. And again, a lot of this takes place online, bouncing from site to site, finding good interactions and descriptions of things. But YouTube has millions of hours of every possible interaction you can possibly have in every game that exists. And so it's a really good source for looking for gameplay. So I looked up some One Piece videos, just to see what kind of different colors do, different characters, leaders, things I might be interested in. I watched a couple how-to videos on how to play the game, but all in, I spent maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours doing research between looking up those initial PDFs and watching a couple YouTube videos with different gameplay aspects. You honestly don't have to watch all of the games or understand every aspect of what's happening, but just to feel the general flow of which characters or styles of gameplay you could get into potentially. Where do we go next? Well, for One Piece, I started looking at deck lists that other people built and cross-referencing those deck lists with starter decks, seeing which cards are played in both. Because it's important to understand which product you can start to pursue based on the gameplay that you want to experience. You see these things connecting across now. Ultimately, I landed on purple because I like the gameplay style, the sort of balance of walking back some of your resources to interact with your opponents, and just generally mucking up the board in kind of a slow, grindy control type fashion. And to be honest, my description of what this deck and what this color does might be off, but that's where I'm at in this process. And so for One Piece, looking for these deck lists, the big source that I found was Limitless, which I'm fairly familiar with through Pokemon because they also host a bunch of Pokemon lists in a variety of forms. So onepiece.limitless.com, I think, has a whole list of different cards and strategies and deck lists that people have used in the past, and it's a great space for kind of browsing through some of my options. Obviously, then I go and look at the deck lists from different starter decks to find one that kind of works, and then once I have a couple in mind, I can go check out the local game store and see what they have on offer. Typically, with something like One Piece, the advice that I've seen is that you want to buy 2 of the same starter deck, so you make sure to get full playsets, which is 4, of each of the main rare cards that come in it. Because unlike Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! That only come with 1 of each, One Piece tends to come with 2 of each, so it only takes 2 decks to complete kind of a complete set of the useful cards in it. Once you have that, you can then start tailoring out some of the less used stuff, pick up some of the cheap singles, and you are well on your way to a gameplay-ready deck. You won't be super competitive, but you're at least at that entry point where you can start playing in person in the store. And I think that's where we want to get with gameplay, at least initially. But once you know what you want to play, how do you get those cards? I think different games will have different areas of access. For Magic the Gathering, most of the cards that you want, the easiest way to pick them up is going to be online with something like TCG Player. Your local game store probably has a full cabinet of cards that could be useful. They might have a big long box of things that you can get, 5 for $1, 10 for $1 for some of the more general bulk stuff. And you can build out a deck pretty quickly and fill any of the gaps you might have with other generic stuff. For something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or One Piece, you can honestly get away with just buying the starter decks. 3 of for Yu-Gi-Oh!, 2 of for One Piece, and just kind of building out the shell of the deck with 4 of the main rare cards in that deck, and then slowly bringing in new cards that you need to complete your strategy, replacing some of those lower-powered, less useful cards that came in those starter decks. It's a really good way to get involved in the game, buy some of that initial product up front, and start playing the game to find whether that community works for you without the full commit of buying a full meta competitive deck. If you are interested in finding that full meta competitive deck, I do not begrudge you buying all of those cards and stepping into the store for the first time with a fully optimized list. If that's what you are looking to do, go for it. But just fair warning, in some of these games, it's going to be a little bit pricey. So now, we've found the way that we want to play. And we've bought the cards, or the miniatures, that we want to play with. We've already done a little bit of exploration into our local game stores, into our online communities and other spaces to find groups of people that think the way we do about the game. Whether that's playing the game or just collecting the cards or talking about the story, we can start exploring those communities. Just stop by, say hi, join some events, try it out, ask for a couple games here and there. I know it can be daunting to enter new spaces. And that's something that can be really hard, but I think having something like this, having this structure, this guided interaction can really help us open up, meet new people, have new experiences. At the end of the day, all of this is just an excuse to interact with other people in unique ways. Having something like these games that exercises your mind in a way that allows you to interact with new people, I think it's really special, it's really unique, and it's one of the reasons why games have been a fundamental part of humanity for as long as we have records of humans. Because finding the right group of people that play the game the way that you want to play, competitively, casually, or just collecting, that appreciate the story and the style and the aspects of the game that you're looking for, is what makes a game feel like home. And I think once you've found that, congratulations. You've really gotten into it. Thanks for talking.